I pulled into the circular drive of Axiom Technologies headquarters just after dawn, my 2004 Honda Civic sputtering like it always did when I eased off the gas. The building rose before me like a glass cathedral, all chrome and reflected sunlight, the kind of place that seemed to hum with wealth even in silence. I'd been working here for 3 months, but every time I arrived, I felt like an imposter slipping through a crack in the universe. My car looked especially pathetic against the backdrop of Teslas and Mercedes lining the Valet station, their polished bodies gleaming like jewels. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, reminding myself I'd earned my place here through late nights and relentless code reviews, not through the balance in my bank account. But as I rolled to a stop, I saw the valet's face change, his polite smile dissolving into something cold and sharp. He looked at my car the way you might look at roadkill on an otherwise pristine highway. I already knew what was coming, and my chest tightened with the familiar weight of shame. The valet was tall, mid-30s, with a kind of sculpted confidence that comes from working among people who tip in $100 bills. He approached my driver's side window slowly, almost reluctantly, as if my car might contaminate him through proximity. When I rolled down the manual crank window, yes, manual, I watched his eyebrows lift in genuine disbelief. He didn't even try to hide his smirk. "This is executive parking, ma'am," he said. His voice dripping with condescension masked as helpfulness. I felt heat creep up my neck, that burning sensation that precedes humiliation. "I work here," I said quietly, hating how small my voice sounded. He glanced at the visitor log on his tablet, then back at my car, then at me, a 26-year-old woman in a wrinkled blouse I'd ironed at midnight. Something flickered in his eyes that I recognized immediately. The assumption that I didn't belong. "Oh, I'm sure you do," he said, and the way he emphasized sure made it clear he thought I was lying. He leaned closer, and I could smell his expensive cologne cutting through the morning air. "But this lot is for senior staff and executives only. Employee parking is around back." I wanted to tell him I had every right to be here, that I'd been given a special access pass 3 weeks ago, but the words stuck in my throat like broken glass. Instead, I reached into my purse and pulled out the laminated parking permit with my name and clearance level printed in bold letters. His face shifted when he saw it, not to apology but to something worse, resentment. He took the card from my hand roughly, studying it like he was searching for evidence of forgery. "Ha!" he muttered, clearly disappointed he couldn't turn me away. But I could see the wheels turning behind his eyes, the calculations of someone who'd decided I was still beneath him. He handed back my permit with 2 fingers, as if touching it too long might lower his status. "I'll need to park it myself," he said flatly. "Protocol 4. Vehicles like this." The pause before vehicles told me everything. I nodded, feeling my face burn as I gathered my laptop bag and coffee thermos. As I stepped out, he walked around my car slowly, inspecting it the way a health inspector might examine a failing restaurant. I heard him mutter something under his breath. I couldn't make out the words, but the contempt in his tone was unmistakable. Other employees were arriving now, stepping out of their luxury cars with the ease of people who'd never questioned whether they belonged. They didn't notice me standing there, clutching my worn bag, watching this man circle my car like a predator. I should have walked away, headed into the building, let it go. But something kept me frozen in place, watching. The valet opened my driver's door and slid into the seat, his face twisting with disgust at the ripped-up upholstery and the smell of old coffee. He adjusted the mirror with theatrical annoyance, making sure everyone could see what an inconvenience this was for him. I watched him grip the steering wheel with just his fingertips, as if the poverty might be contagious. He revved the engine twice, unnecessarily, mockingly, and several people turned to look. My stomach dropped as I realized he was making a spectacle of my car, of me, turning my arrival into entertainment for the morning shift. I wanted to scream at him, to defend myself, to explain that this car had been my grandmother's, that it carried me through college and cross-country moves, that it meant more than any Tesla ever could. But I stood silent, my throat tight with unshed tears. He began to pull away, and I thought the humiliation was finally over. Then I saw him reach for the glove box. It was standard procedure. Valets always checked for the registration and insurance, logged the details in case of damage or emergency. But my heart seized in my chest because I'd forgotten what else was in there. 3 days ago, the CEO himself, Marcus Chen, the billionaire founder whose face graced Forbes covers, had slipped something into my glove box after a late-night meeting in the parking garage. He'd been cryptic about it, telling me not to open it until I needed to, that it was insurance for what was coming. I'd been too exhausted and overwhelmed to think much about it, and honestly, I'd half forgotten it was there. Now I watched the valet pop open the glove box, his hand reaching inside with casual entitlement. The morning light caught the edge of a cream-colored envelope, embossed with the company's executive seal. I saw the exact moment his fingers touched it. His entire body went rigid. He pulled out the envelope slowly, like someone defusing a bomb, his eyes widening as he read whatever was written on the front. From where I stood, I could just make out the CEO's distinctive handwriting, bold and slanted, but I couldn't read the words. The valet's face drained of color in seconds, his smug expression crumbling into something between shock and terror. He looked up, searching the parking lot frantically until his eyes found mine. The contempt was gone, replaced by naked fear. He opened his mouth, closed it, then looked back down at the envelope trembling in his hands. Whatever was written there had just rewritten every assumption he'd made about me. I felt my pulse quicken, not with shame now, but with a strange, electric anticipation. Something had shifted, and I had no idea what storm was about to break. I started walking toward my car, toward him, my footsteps echoing against the pavement. He scrambled out of the driver's seat like it had caught fire, the envelope clutched against his chest. "Ma'am, he started, but his voice cracked. Other valets had stopped what they were doing, sensing something wrong in their colleagues' panic. A woman in a silver Porsche slowed her approach, watching with curious eyes. The morning air felt charged, heavy with the weight of whatever truth that envelope contained. I kept walking, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. The valet took a step backward, then another, his professional mask completely shattered. I was 3 feet away when he finally managed to speak again, and what he said made my blood run cold. "I'm so sorry, I didn't know, I had no idea who you really are." I stood there, my hand extended, waiting for him to give me the envelope that clearly terrified him. His fingers shook as he held it out, and I noticed sweat had broken out across his forehead despite the cool morning air. When I took it from him, our eyes met, and I saw something I'd never expected to see in someone who just mocked me. Genuine fear. Not just embarrassment or discomfort, but the bone-deep terror of someone who realizes they've made a catastrophic mistake. The envelope was heavier than I expected, the paper thick and expensive, the kind reserved for board meetings and legal documents. Across the front, in Marcus Chen's unmistakable handwriting, were 4 words that made my stomach flip. "For emergency use only." Beneath that, in smaller letters, "Regarding Project Lighthouse and Dr. Sarah Mitchell." That was my name, but the doctor title, I'd never used it here, had deliberately left it off my employee profile. How did he know? I looked up at the valet, who was backing away like I might explode. "Did you read this?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. He shook his head violently, but his eyes told a different story. He'd seen enough. "Just the outside," he stammered. "Just your name and the project code. I swear I didn't open it, I wouldn't." He was rambling now, his earlier arrogance completely evaporated. Other employees were starting to gather, drawn by the commotion, their expensive coffees cooling in their hands as they watched this unfold. I felt exposed, vulnerable, like I was standing naked in a spotlight. The envelope in my hands felt alive, pulsing with whatever secrets it contained. Part of me wanted to tear it open right there, to understand why this piece of paper had transformed a sneering valet into a terrified stranger. But something told me this wasn't the place. Not with all these eyes watching, these people who already saw me as different, lesser. Everyone back to work, a voice cut through the crowd, and I turned to see Janet from HR approaching, her heels clicking with authority. She was a woman who existed in perfectly pressed suits and passive-aggressive emails, and right now her face was tight with concern. She looked at the envelope in my hands, then at the valet, then back at me. "Dr. Mitchell, perhaps we should discuss this inside." There it was again, that title I'd hidden like a secret shame. I'd spent 3 months being Sarah from the development team, the girl with the cheap car and the quiet voice, and now suddenly I was Dr. Mitchell, like I'd been wearing a disguise. The valet made a small, strangled sound, and I realized he was putting pieces together, understanding just how badly he'd miscalculated. Janet touched my elbow gently, guiding me toward the building, but I pulled away. I wasn't ready to leave yet. "What's Project Lighthouse?" the valet asked suddenly, his voice small and desperate. It was the question of someone trying to understand the magnitude of their mistake. I saw Janet tense beside me, saw her hand move toward her phone. This was clearly information he wasn't supposed to have. But I felt something shift inside me, some part of my personality that I'd kept carefully suppressed for 3 months. I was tired of being small, of apologizing for my car and my age and my existence in spaces where I didn't look like I belonged. "It's classified," I said quietly, but with an edge that made him flinch. "Which you would have known if you'd treated me like a colleague instead of trash you had to sweep off the curb." His face crumpled, and I felt a sharp satisfaction that surprised me with its intensity. Was this who I was becoming? Someone who took pleasure in others' pain? The thought disturbed me, but not enough to stop. Janet was pulling at my arm now, more insistently, her voice low and urgent. "Sarah, please. This needs to be contained." Contained. Like I was a spill, a problem, something to be managed and hidden away. I looked around at the gathered employees, their faces a mix of confusion and fascination, and I realized that whatever happened next would define me here. I could go inside, be the good girl, let HR smooth this over and return to my comfortable invisibility. Or I could stand here in the morning light and stop apologizing for taking up space. The envelope in my hand seemed to grow warmer, heavier, like it was urging me toward something. Broke the seal. Janet gasped. The valet went pale. Inside was a single sheet of paper, Marcus Chen's letterhead at the top, and as my eyes scanned the first line, I understood why this letter had such power. "To whom it may concern," it read, and even in typed text I could hear Marcus's voice, formal and absolute. "Dr. Sarah Mitchell is the lead architect and sole designer of Project Lighthouse, the proprietary AI system that will define Axiom's next decade. Her work represents the most significant technological advancement our company has ever produced. She has my complete confidence and authority to act in any capacity necessary to protect this project. Any interference with her work, any disrespect to her person, or any breach of her security clearance will be considered a direct violation of my executive orders and grounds for immediate termination and legal action." The words blurred as I read them again, my brain struggling to process what this meant. I'd been working on Lighthouse for 8 months before joining Axiom, in a dark basement apartment, surviving on ramen and coffee, convinced no one would ever take my work seriously. Marcus had found me through an academic paper I'd published, had offered me this position, but I'd thought I was just another developer on a large team. I'd had no idea he considered me the lead architect. I'd had no idea I had this kind of power. The valet was openly crying now, silent tears running down his face as he stared at the letter in my shaking hands. "I'm so sorry," he whispered, and this time it sounded genuine, broken, terrified of consequences he could finally see. Janet had gone completely still beside me, her phone forgotten, her carefully maintained composure shattered. I saw her doing calculations too. How to spin this, how to protect the company, how to manage me now that I was revealed as something more than the quiet girl in the old car. But I wasn't looking at them anymore. I was looking at the last paragraph of the letter, the part that made my blood run cold. "Dr. Mitchell has recently received credible threats regarding her work and safety. I have personally assigned her this letter as protection and proof of her status. Anyone who attempts to undermine, threaten, or harm her will face the full legal and financial force of Axiom Technologies and my personal resources. She is under my protection. Marcus Chen, founder and CEO. My hand started shaking so badly I almost dropped the paper. But what threats? I thought back over the past few weeks, the strange emails I dismissed as spam, the feeling of being watched in parking garages, the way my apartment had seemed disturbed when I came home from late shifts. I'd convinced myself I was being paranoid, that the stress of the project was making me imagine dangers that didn't exist. But Marcus had known something I didn't, had prepared this letter as a shield I might need. The valet was still standing there, frozen in his own private catastrophe, and suddenly I understood the full weight of what he'd done. He hadn't just mocked a junior employee. He'd publicly humiliated someone the CEO had personally marked as essential and under protection. In the corporate hierarchy of Silicon Valley, he'd basically committed professional suicide. I should have felt vindicated, powerful, triumphant. Instead, I felt the walls closing in, felt the target on my back grow larger and brighter. If Marcus thought I needed this kind of protection, what exactly was I walking into? Janet finally found her voice, and when she spoke, it was with the careful tone people use around things that might shatter. Dr. Mitchell, we need to get you inside immediately. Security protocol. She wasn't asking anymore. I folded the letter carefully, slid it back into its envelope, and looked one last time at the valet who'd started this unraveling. He looked destroyed, his career probably ending before my eyes, and I felt a complicated mix of satisfaction and guilt churning in my stomach. "What's your name?" I asked him quietly. He blinked, surprised I was still speaking to him. "Thomas," he managed. "Thomas Carver." I nodded slowly, committing it to memory. "Thomas, I'm going to ask you one question, and I need you to think very carefully before you answer." His throat worked as he swallowed. "Did you tell anyone else what you saw in my glove box before I came over?" The question hung in the air like smoke, and I watched him process what I was really asking. If he'd shared the information, texted a friend, told another valet, posted something stupid on social media, then whatever security Marcus had tried to build around me might already be compromised. Thomas's face went through several expressions before settling on something like horrified understanding. "No," he said firmly. "I swear. I saw your name in the project code and I froze. I didn't have time to." He stopped, glanced at the gathered crowd, then back at me. "But they all saw me react. They know something's going on." That was true. At least a dozen employees were still watching, filming on their phones probably, turning this morning's drama into content for their group chats and social media. The story would spread through the company like wildfire. The girl with the cheap car is actually somebody important. I could already imagine the rumors, the speculation, the sudden shift in how people treated me. I'd spent 3 months invisible, and now I'd be hypervisible, every move scrutinized. Janet was on her phone now, speaking in low, urgent tones to what I assumed was executive security. I caught fragments: breach of protocol, and CEO's direct orders, and immediate containment. The word containment again, like I was a toxic spill spreading across the pristine campus. I looked at my car, still running, driver's door open, my grandmother's rosary hanging from the rearview mirror like a talisman that had failed to protect me. The car suddenly felt like evidence of everything I tried to hide, not just my lack of money, but my entire history, the working-class background that made me an outsider in this world of venture capital and stock options. I'd thought if I just kept my head down, worked hard, proved my worth, the car wouldn't matter. But it did matter because it marked me as different, and different in Silicon Valley meant vulnerable. I realized Marcus had probably understood this better than I did, had known the letter might become necessary. "I want him to keep his job," I said suddenly, the words surprising even me. Janet's head snapped up. Thomas made a small, desperate sound. "What?" Janet said, and I could see her trying to recalibrate, to understand what game I was playing. But I wasn't playing a game. I was thinking about power, real power, not the kind that came from humiliating someone who'd humiliated me. Thomas made assumptions based on what he saw, I said, keeping my voice steady. He was wrong and it was unprofessional, but I don't want his life destroyed over it. I want him to learn from it. I turned to Thomas directly. You judged me based on my car, on my clothes, on whatever story you told yourself about who belongs in spaces like this. That's the mistake I want you to remember. Not the consequences but the actual mistake. Do you understand? He nodded frantically, relief and confusion warring on his face. He'd been prepared for punishment, maybe even expected it, but grace, mercy, that wasn't part of the script. Janet looked like she wanted to argue, but something in my expression must have stopped her. I was learning in real time what it meant to have the kind of authority Marcus's letter granted me. I could ruin Thomas with a word, or I could choose something else entirely. However, I continued, and Thomas's brief hope flickered, you're going to do something for me. Every time you see someone pull up in a car that doesn't match this place's aesthetic, every time you make assumptions about who deserves respect based on appearances, I want you to remember this morning. I want you to remember how wrong you were and how close you came to destroying your career over prejudice disguised as professionalism. Can you do that? My voice was stronger now, clearer, shedding the apologetic tone I'd carried like armor for months. Thomas nodded, and I saw something shift in his eyes. Not just fear, but actual understanding. Maybe I was naive, but I wanted to believe people could learn, could change, could become better versions of themselves when given the chance. Janet ended her call and looked at me with new calculation in her eyes. Security wants you in the executive wing, she said. Marcus is flying back early from Tokyo. He wants to brief you personally on the threats. The word threats made my mouth go dry. What kind of threats? I asked, and hated how small my voice sounded again. She glanced at the crowd, lowered her voice. The kind that require NDAs and secure rooms. The kind that explain why a 26-year-old with a PhD in quantum computing has been working under an assumed clearance level for 3 months. So they'd all known, HR, security, probably half the executive team, that I was more than I appeared to be. They'd watched me eat lunch alone, field condescending comments from senior developers who had half my expertise, park my pathetic car at the edge of the lot. They'd let me be invisible because that was the plan, the security protocol. And now that invisibility was shattered, and I had to face whatever came next without its protection. I walked toward the building with Janet beside me, leaving Thomas standing next to my car like a statue of his own shame. The crowd parted as we passed, and I felt their eyes on me differently now. Not dismissive, but curious, respectful, maybe a little afraid. I wondered how many of them had made the same assumptions Thomas had seen my car and decided I was someone to overlook. I wondered how many of them were recalculating their treatment of me, their casual dismissals and interrupted explanations. As we entered the glass doors, the cool air-conditioned air hit my face, and I caught my reflection in the lobby's mirrored walls. I looked the same as I had that morning. Wrinkled blouse, tired eyes, hair that needed washing, but something fundamental had shifted. I wasn't Invisible Sarah anymore. I was Dr. Mitchell, the architect of something important enough to threaten, to protect, to fear. The question was whether I was ready for what that identity would cost me. 3 hours later, I sat in a secure conference room with Marcus Chen, 2 lawyers, and the head of corporate security, learning about the people who wanted to steal or destroy my work. There were competitors willing to pay millions for my research, foreign governments interested in the defense applications, and at least one group Marcus described as concerning ideological extremists, who saw AI advancement as an existential threat. My hands shook as I reviewed the threat assessments, the intercepted emails, the surveillance footage of people following me. Marcus watched me carefully, his expression unreadable. "Why didn't you tell me?" finally asked. He leaned back in his chair, and for a moment he looked tired, older than his 43 years. "Because you were already under enough pressure," he said simply. "The work was hard enough without adding fear. I thought we could protect you quietly, let you focus on Lighthouse, reveal your role when the project launched." He smiled without humor. I didn't account for a valet with a superiority complex forcing my hand early. I almost laughed, except nothing about this was funny. What happens now? I asked, though I already knew the answer was written in every security protocol they were explaining, every restriction being placed on my life. Marcus reached across the table and took the envelope. My envelope now, I supposed. Now you understand why this letter exists, he said. Not just as proof of your authority, but as a shield. Anyone who knows what you're working on, who understands your value, becomes either an ally or a threat. Thomas learned which side he wanted to be on. Others won't be so easily convinced. He slid the envelope back to me. Keep this with you always. Use it when you need to. Trust very carefully. His words settled over me like a weight, and I thought about Thomas, still probably standing in the parking lot. His whole worldview shattered by a piece of paper and his own assumptions. I thought about all the times I'd been underestimated, dismissed, overlooked, and how that invisibility had actually been a kind of protection I hadn't appreciated. Now everyone would know who I was, what I was worth, and that knowledge would paint a target I could never erase. I left the building just before sunset, my cheap car now parked in a reserved spot near the executive entrance, flanked by security cameras and within sight of 2 guards Marcus had insisted on. Thomas was gone, sent home for the day, probably to contemplate his near-miss with unemployment, but the other valets watched me with careful, respectful distance as I approached. One of them, a young woman I'd never spoken to, gave me a small nod that might have been solidarity or simply acknowledgement. I slid into my car, felt the familiar rip in the upholstery, smelled my grandmother's lavender sachets mixed with old coffee. Everything was the same, but I was different. I'd crossed some threshold I couldn't uncross, stepped into a version of myself that had power and danger braided together. The envelope sat in my passenger seat now, no longer hidden in the glove box, and as I started the engine, still sputtering, still embarrassing, I made a decision. I wasn't going to buy a new car. Not yet, maybe not ever. Because this car was a reminder that worth isn't measured in luxury, that intelligence doesn't arrive in expensive packaging, and that the people who judge you by surface appearances will always be the ones who miss what matters. Sometimes the most radical thing you can do is refuse to be ashamed of where you came from, even when, especially when, you've arrived somewhere that makes your origins inconvenient. I pulled out of the lot slowly, carefully, and in my rearview mirror, I saw the valets watching, learning, perhaps for the first time, that respect isn't earned by what you drive. It's owed to who you are and what you contribute to the world, regardless of the vehicle that carries you there.